Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I'm Elizabeth, the events coordinator for Gibson's Bookstore, and I am joined by two authors tonight. We are very pleased to welcome back Robert V.S. Redick, who is joining us with his new novel, Sidewinders, which is a continuation of his previous novel, Master Assassins, The Fire Sacraments. He is joined by his friend, author Daryl Gregory, whose new novel, The Album of Dr. Moreau, was newly released this spring. Daryl, I believe it is a dark and stormy night where you are. So just in case we lose Daryl, nobody panic. I'm sure he'll pop right back in. And just in case lightning strikes, hopefully it won't strike literally twice. Now, gentlemen, thank you to the two of you for joining us this evening.
Oh,
great to be here.
No, thanks for hosting this. This is awesome.
Absolutely. So to give our audience the basic framework for your books, why don't each of you give me the barest elevator pitch of your novels? Robert, can you give me like in a line or two, just
I came up with one.
I mean, yours is two brothers being chased through a desert. I know, it's like a doorstop right there.
I like to say it's the anti-war epic fantasy family gothic road trip silly serious novel you've been looking for,
involving a desert and an army of fanatics.
That's right, of course.
And magic,
yeah.
And the creepy ghost girl and yes.
All right. And all kinds of stuff, monsters, cults of personality. We'll get to all that.
Excellent. And Daryl, elevator pitch for the album of Dr. Moreau?
The album of Dr. Moreau. It's the opposite of Robert's. It's a small, tiny novella. You can inhale it accidentally. And it's basically, what if a group of genetically engineered human-animal hybrids were rescued from an evil science barge and then became a boy band, and then a locked room mystery happens. It's very simple.
Happens every Tuesday.
It's a standard locked room animal-human hybrid boy band mystery.
And
I want that embroidered on
funny and creepy.
Excellent. All right. So that both of these books are available from Gibson's Bookstore. And with that, the two of you are going to enthrall us with your conversation this evening. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Daryl, I'm so glad you were able to do this. Not quite the same as being at the bar with you, but it's pretty good.
Right. I mean, we're all in withdrawal right now over con things. I'm going to my first con in a year and a half, Saturday. And just to add double risk factor, I'm going to Spain. And Spain will welcome you in. The United States may not welcome me back. I have to take a lot of tests to make sure I'm COVID negative, even though I have the vaccine. I still have to take a test. So I'm a little nervous that I may not get back to the States, but we're going to try this.
What's the con?
It's called Celsius, and it's what is the Celsius? Celsius 232. Like, it's the same as Fahrenheit 451, but in Celsius. And it's a little con in Asturias in Spain, and I've been so jealous. Friends of mine have gone to this convention where they don't even hardly schedule you. They just want you to sit around and drink wine in the square and talk to people. And like, I feel like I've been training for that my whole life.
I have heard really good things about that. That strange little experience. That sounds so great. Oh my God. Yeah. And and it could be worse if they don't let you back in. I mean, to be stranded in Spain with good wine.
There are worse things. And the con organizer, a friend of mine, Christina, who's also my translator of one of my books. So we're launching 2 books there. Raising Stony Mayhall is going to be there. And they've changed its title to The Life and Miracles of Stony Mayhall. So it sounds like a saint. A book called After Party will be launched there. And my publisher already has another one of my books. So it's going to be a fun time, but the con organizer, who, like I said, is my translator, said, I also write cookbooks, so we'll take care of you. Like if I have to get stranded there for 2 weeks.
And it's gazpacho season. And there is nothing like gazpacho in a square in Spain. Oh my Lord. I mean, there's gazpacho everywhere on earth, but to have some in a square sitting outside in Spain, you'll thank me.
Oh, good, because I've never gone to Spain, so I'm very excited.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, I hope you like ham. But
yeah, I'm a big fan of ham. So
okay.
when are you going to be able to get out amongst the people for this book?
Well, so I didn't schedule any live things for around the book launch time. It really just seemed a bit iffy for me. And so, I'm starting a new job and other housebound things, new puppy. I am supposed to do KGB in the fall. So that is at the moment the only live thing on my agenda.
Wait, when?
November 17th.
Oh, shoot. I'm going to be doing it in October.
Really?
We're going to miss each other. All right.
Well, maybe I can zip down there. I'm not that far. Anyway.
All right.
Yeah. We have to continue this off camera, I guess. But,
yeah.
But man, as you can tell, audience, we go way back. So, yeah.
Yeah. Let me tell
a brief story.
Yeah. So real quickly, just so you know, Robert, I was so jealous of him because he walks into this convention and he's got this massive epic fantasy, and I could barely hold my concentration for 10 pages at a time. And he's like, yeah, it's going to be a trilogy. He was lying. It later turned into 4 books. But I was just so amazed at your ability to first book out of the gate, to just basically an epic comes out of you. And readers and audience should know, nothing has changed. I still cannot concentrate, and Robert can still do just epics fall out of him.
I cannot concentrate, says the author of Spoonbenders. What I mean, that is the most intricately put together, unbelievably woven story from a character point of view. But oh my God, don't get me to digress on that.
All right.
But so we were going to do a couple of little readings and just continue this chat and take your questions and just do what we do, talk books, talk life and the writing life and so on. And I think you were going to go first, right, Daryl?
I'm going to go first. I just get a brief thing, and folks, remember, like Elizabeth said, put questions in the chat room and we'll make this a conversation. So yeah, the album of Dr. Moreau, this came out from tour.com novellas in May. And like I said, it's about a human-animal hybrid boy band. And I don't know why I decided that it had to be a murder mystery at the same time. There was something about trapping them in a penthouse and doing a Murder on the Orient Express kind of thing where you just meet all the characters and they're all jammed in there together. And so I'm just going to read a short section. So one thing I should tell you is I hate boy bands, or at least I did, because my daughter, who's now a grown woman, when she was 10, she brought boy bands into our lives, and it nearly drove me crazy. The bubblegum pop. I was going to be the cool parent who would let her listen to anything. If she wants death metal, fine. If she wants country, fine. But she chose bubblegum pop. And so, and both my kids, my son Ian and my daughter Emma, grew up to be musicians. And I'm wearing tonight my son's band T-shirt. The band's defunct, like all bands, but Honeydew was his band in college. And so when it came time, I said, look, in this book, I want to have a defense of bubblegum pop. I want you to explain to me what's happening in pop. Could you just write me a rant that one of the characters could deliver? So there's 5 members of the band. There's Tusk the elephant guy. There's a bonobo named Devin, who's a sexy beast. There's a himbo kind of cat boy, who's the initial suspect. And there's Matt the Bat, who is the funny one. But for this, I wanted Tim the pangolin is the lyricist of the band. He's very shy and he's very grumpy. And so when they finally get him to come out from beneath his couch cushions, the Detective Delgado says to him, you know, my daughter is 9 years old. She's a huge fan. Just this morning, she was singing deep down at the top of her lungs. She loves your songs. I've written a lot of songs, Tim said sadly, but that's the one they always bring up first. Well, your words go so well with the music. I mean, the music's so simple and singable, and your words. What did you say? Did you say simple? I didn't mean anything by it, just that my daughter. Look, say what you will about what you want about my lyrics, but do not talk about the music that way. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. Look, I'm sure I don't, but listen to me. Your average pop song has 8, maybe 9 unique sounds: bass guitar, drums, some synth, and a singer with maybe some backing vocals. And your average boy band has 5 voices that need to be in every damn song, and that muscles out the other sounds. They put a lead singer in the middle, put everybody else on 3/5 interval harmonies, and call it a day. But Wild Boy songs, look, you have no idea. We have all sorts of instrumentals, sometimes 10 distinct sounds at once, plus our vocals, all without overlapping frequencies, drum machines, percussion samples, synth sounds, real instruments. The guitar on One of a Kind, that isn't a patch. That's a real lap steel guitar. And just by production value, our songs are more authentic and varied than anything anyone else is putting out. And I haven't even gotten to the singing. Tim realized he'd gotten to his feet. His toe claws were digging into the carpet. He didn't care. Devin thinks it's all about the lead singer. Devin is the bonobo, the sexy beast. But we put 2 singers on counterpoint with harmonies and full group harmonies on the choruses, and it works. Do you think it's easy to balance out 5 voices? I mean, Tosk, that's the elephant guy, sounds like he's inside a barrel. Matt, the bat, blows out our high frequencies, and it's a nightmare in the studio. Then there's all the interplay. We do these crazy starts and stops on syncopated rhythms, and if any one of us messes that up live, it all falls apart. We're performing songs with no room for error while we are dancing. Think about the chorus in Home. Have you ever heard a hard right turn like that in another pop song? One moment we're singing about loneliness and longing, and then bam, a full-on dance beat for 16 bars. And then back to the ballad. Oh, people like you hear that and think, oh, it's a joke. It's sloppy. No way. 20 years from now, some new young musician will put on that track, hear that change, and it will blow their fucking minds. Oh, but let's talk about the simple one. Let's talk about Deep Down, everybody's goddamn favorite. You know the 2 gaps before the choruses? We end on a non-functional harmony and then go to total silence. That leaves the listener totally high and dry for a full 2 seconds before the chorus hits. That's forever in pop music. All right, fans say it gives them chills, right? Because of our beautiful voices or whatever, but it's because it was written to make them need the resolution and then withholds it. You ever hear a whole stadium of teenage girls go dead quiet in the middle of a pop concert? That's us. That is what we do. The detectives were staring at him, open mouth. Kat, the roadie, wore a sad smile. Tim thought, oops, I did it again. Okay, so that's the rant. That's the rant written by my son. That pretty much all I do is copy and paste that rant in with minor tweaking for breathing, and that was it. See, Robert, I'm here for comic books. You're here to provide serious literature.
No, I'm just laughing so hard because the way you read it is the way I heard it in my head. You know, I could hear that. So, I mean, the distortion between my reading imagination and what I just heard you read was not that great, which means I guess that I know you or something. But man,
you probably heard me get drunk in a con bar and probably go off on a rant. But it was probably
I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, what I missed by not having kids.
Yeah, I'm not saying you have kids solely to help you write your books, but it's a real nice benefit.
Oh my God, that's so good. That's so good. I kind of need to take a few breaths here.
All right, so do I.
Because I'm thinking about all that all over again. Jeez.
Yeah, that's the first real reading I've done aloud from the book, and I sort of like picked it like what can I do here? But,
really?
Thanks for indulging me.
That's your first reading aloud from this?
Yeah, that's okay. So people should know I was a double theater English major.
Right.
And so I was twice as unemployable as the usual liberal arts major. So it's just a lot of frustrated performing. It only comes out.
Yeah. You know, you and Claire Cooney need to get on the stage together sometime if you haven't, because she's also.
I've never been. No, tell me about Claire.
Oh man, I could see you two doing like a call and refrain reading sometime. Oh my God, I got to make that happen. But
okay,
well,
so what are you reading?
Okay, so I'll go on. Yeah, as Daryl said, there are some opposites in our approaches to writing, as you're about to see. I've been thinking about some of your longer works, Daryl, but I will admit that I think of you as sort of an artist of the microcosm in a lot of ways, because you just, like that, you create such compression and such compressed feeling in, even in, books that go on quite a bit like Spoonbenders. There's this feeling of discrete events that have their own tangible reality and their own arc within the larger arc. And I freaking love that, because, I go on little journeys within the big journey, and it's just so masterful and so weird and so good every time. And among the questions I'm going to get back to asking you, and I'll just prepare you in advance, is what it's like to be so untypecastable. Because you've just done so many things in so many voices. Don't answer now.
I won't answer.
Okay. Or maybe I won't answer at all.
But it's called lack of branding, Robert. That's what that's called.
Well, how you manage to pull that trick off? Because they want to brand you, don't they? For understandable reasons. It's somewhat simpler when we're a brand that everyone can recognize.
Yeah.
So I was going to read from the first pages of Sidewinders. Only thing that you all probably ought to know is that I've intended this book to work both as a sequel and a standalone. It's very much a sequel. Indeed, it starts 3 days after Master Assassin's book 1 ends. But I really didn't want this to be a book where if you hadn't just read Master Assassins the week before, you'd be lost at all. And I worked really hard on that, and I'm happy to say that so far readers, the ones I've heard from who haven't read Master Assassins are saying, fine, it was okay. And the ones who read Master Assassins when it came out 3 years ago are saying, I thought I was going to have to go back and read Cliff Notes, but you oriented me and brought me back onto the page. That said, all you need to know really is that this is a story about peasant boys who don't become princes. They stay peasant boys to the bitter, bitter end. They are village conscripts. Condry and Mektu Hinjaman drafted into this horrible religious war that they want nothing to do with. And in book 1, Master Assassins, a lot of that is about getting untangled from the immediate grips of that war and the army that they've been forced into. Many other things are going on too. And it is the first part of this road trip, like I say, but they are, they're raised inside a huge militarized cult of personality that's taken over their entire people. Their queen / Matthias / head of state was a true liberation hero who led their people out of centuries of bondage. She was, if you were ever going to nominate someone to be your people's messiah, she qualifies in a big way. And then she has stayed on for decades and slowly gone insane, and has now launched this war of conquest where the entire continent is her objective. So they get their tails out of the immediate frying pan in book 1, but they are very, very, very much in the fire. And the only real way that they can get away is to cross this desert that's twice the width of the Sahara. And that's getting started as Sidewinders opens. I don't think there's too much else you really need to know. I'm going to just read for about 10 minutes from the very, very beginning. And chapter 1 is called The Wasp. And here we go. The pit had appalled him even before he learned what it contained. From the plateau above, it was merely a round hole in the earth, but as they descended, it took on a quality of menace. Broad, black, dry as a desert tomb. Here on the canyon floor, it gaped at him, promising nothing but disaster, a chill wind moaning across its mouth. He had no wish to approach it. Who in their right mind would? Come, urged the camel drivers, breath blooming white through chattering teeth. Visit with us, a special place, the well of Rithalundra, once only, mandatory. What's down there, he said. Smiling at his unease but nervous themselves, they took his arms and led him straight for the pit. 14 men, nudging, hustling. You have to look, Mr. Condry, they murmured. Don't you want good luck in the desert? Who knows if you will pass this way again? What if you die? That's just what I was thinking, he said. Dawn had come. Jackals sobbed in the hills. The camels stood immense and obdurate, and the sun etched their sawtooth shadows on the canyon floor. The mercenaries lurched among the animals, blinking and grimacing. The caravan master was trimming his beard. Condry's toes were numb and his hands cramped with cold. Why me, he wanted to shout at the camel men. I'm a coward, see? I don't even like basements. Why us? Their fixed smiles replied. We have just entered this desert, this great killer who dispatches even the best of us, the most sage and seasoned, indifferent as the rag that wipes the soot from the kettle. Now you appear and we must accept you, share our camels and our water and our way. They are rationed, life is rationed. Why should we die that you might live? Aren't we leaving, he tried, more anxious with every step. The saddlebags, my gear, I'm not ready for the march. First things first, Mr. Condry, spurn a blessing and you may not arrive at all. The caravan had descended the ridge in darkness, 90 drivers, 40 fighting men and women, a threadbare prince and his lone retainer, a surgeon, a cook, a dour desert veteran bringing up the rear, 150 camels, a dozen goats to be eaten in stages, a crate of pigeons and a pocket owl, whatever that was, 2 hairless dogs. They were in mortal need of haste, but only a few of them knew why. The caravan master had forbidden Condry and his companions to reveal the truth of their situation. When Condry's half-brother Mektu observed that the truth would encourage speed in just about anyone, the master had given him a stern rebuke. I set the pace and the rest comply. They need no further motivation, and you know nothing of the desert or its people to suggest such a thing. So I'm going to skip a couple pages here. Sorry, I'm skipping over the relationships and love and sex part of it because that's a lot of background to this. Interesting as it might be.
You have to buy it just for the crazy sex scenes, page after page.
But just pretend you don't know I'm skipping that now. It's just a rabbit hole, you know. So I'm getting back to the immediate action here, about 2 pages later. And I didn't give you any warning about what Mektu is like as a person, but if anybody's read Master Assassins, that's the one thing they absolutely remember, what Mektu is like as a person, but you're about to find out. So here we are again. The mouth of the pit was fringed with button cacti and dead grass. Radiant cracks gave it the likeness of a window pierced by a stone. He could have bolted when he saw Eshet's reaction. That was the love interest I skipped over. That small but unmistakable no. He could have fought out of the camel driver's grip and fled back to the main company, safe for the moment, and branded spineless, craven, incapable of trust. Closer, they urged him. This is a holy place. Do not refuse us, please. Condry chuckled, a fly wallowing in tar. He had such fine, such excellent reasons to refuse. It was late. Soon the shadows would vanish and the heat would find them out. And the death squads on the road behind them, they would be searching too. Don't fear, Mr. Condry, said an older man with one cataract-clouded eye. No danger unless you disturb it. Otherwise it sleeps. Condry blinked at him. The language they shared was neither the driver's mother tongue nor his own. What sleeps, he demanded. Are you telling me something lives in there? I thought you said this thing was a well. Yes, yes, they assured him, a mighty well, an imperial well, the very life of the district in earlier times, with stairs, landings, carvings of the gods, alcoves for the storage of tubers and grain, broad here at the surface, but narrowing to a bottleneck in the depths above the water source. There's still water in that hole? Oh no, yes, maybe, gabbled the drivers, before arguing their way to a consensus. The world was drier now, the desert had advanced. Maybe water still flowed in the depths, but only a fool would seek it. The well had passed out of human hands. It belonged to the wasp. Wasp, did you say? The wasp, repeated the camel drivers. They considered him warily, as though alarmed at the extent of his ignorance. Then Kandri saw his brother standing at the back of the crowd. Mektu's long-fingered hands squirmed at his sides. His lips were puckered in bewilderment. The wasp, he said. That makes no goddamn sense. How big is the wasp? Some of the men threw their arms wide, others and pinched the air. The wasp was tiny, unless it was huge. I have a great idea, said Mektu. Let's leave. Kandri nodded. The break was over. The master's aide was waving his red kerchief, but the camel drivers stood their ground, eyes closed, fists pressed together beneath their chins, the oldest among them chanting in a whisper. Thanks for this, everyone, said Mektu over loud. I mean it. We're honored to have seen this dead, cold, creepy Mektu, said Kandri. They're praying. Startled, Mektu uttered an obscenity, and the drivers flinched. Kandri glared at him, and Mektu hid his face in the crook of his elbow, as he did when overcome with shame. The drivers chanted, seedlings are people, flowering in dust, life where there was no life, brief mornings of green. And everyone crouched down to rub a little of the dry earth against their foreheads. Everyone save Mektu, who could not see what was happening. Kandri considered a prayer of his own for good behavior from Mektu. His brother had yet to insult the drivers in any ghastly way, but it would come. They had caught up with the caravan just 3 days before. The prayer ended. The crowd stood straight. Mektu lowered his arm. One of the elders offered him a pinch of dust and mimed the ritual gesture. Oh, gods, sorry, shit. Mektu tried to rub the old man's forehead. Kandri turned away, hopeless, don't torture yourself. And then the lunatic attacked. He was just one of the camel men, a dusty face in the crowd. He struck Kandri in a flying tackle and knocked him right off his feet. They landed together, grappling barely a yard from the pit. His attacker clawed at him, seeking his eyeballs, howling the prophet's name, his face awash with sweat and tears, missing teeth, black gouging fingernails. Then a knife. In Kandri's mind, something leaped. He caught the man's wrist as the blade descended, and the knife bit in the earth beside his chin. He raised his head and seized the man's whole ear in his jaws and hugged the man and rolled. The first snap was the blade breaking, the second his attacker's thumb. A spasm of agony, a howl. He bucked to his feet in one motion and kicked the man in the stomach and drew his machete from its sheath. Kandri Hingeman, bellowed Mektu, triumphant. That's my brother. You do not fuck with this man. No other attackers. 20 faces, staring, abashed. He could have brought the machete down for the kill, but he did not need to. The man had fainted from the pain. But the letter, his hand flew to his chest. The calfskin pouch was still there. He could feel its rawhide stitching through his robe. He had not dared to part with it when they joined the caravan and their slight possessions placed in saddlebags. He had sewn the patch to his old army belt and worn it sidelong across his chest. Now it never left his person or his thoughts. How could it possibly exist, that letter more precious than his own life, than all their lives together? And how was he able to sleep at night, to walk or run or fight or breathe? Its few pages weighed no more than one of Eshet's flatbreads, but it was crushing him with its weight. Kandri turned his head and reeled. He stood just inches from the pit. He swayed, caught his toe on something. The black hole spun beneath him. Mektu's hand closed on his arm. You bleeding? I don't think so. He wanted to vomit, but it was only nerves, cowardice, his mortal fear of being buried alive. The camel drivers, looking guilty, began to back away. Thank you, Mek, Kandri whispered. Just a fucking minute, shouted Mektu, freezing the camel drivers in their tracks. He pointed at the fallen man. Who is this shit? What's the profit to him? You sandrats have your own religion, don't you? What do you need ours for? Are you trying to become Chilotos? That's their ethnic group. If you are, you're cracked. I'm a Chiloto. It's not a clan you want to join. The camel drivers inched backwards, studying them with more than a little horror. Not all believers are Chilotos, growled Kandri, steadying himself. And we're unbelievers anyway now, you fool. I know that, snapped Mektu. I forget now and then. Answer my question, somebody. What are you staring at me for? Stop clowning, said Kandri, and speak common if you want them to understand. Mektu obliged, unfortunately. I'm not possessed, you know. Oh, fuck. Kandri tried to throttle him, but Mektu held him at arm's length. So what if I'm not like other men? That doesn't mean I have a thing in my head. Don't spread rumors. It's a nasty habit. There were no fucking rumors, Kandri growled. Ung's blood, we just met them. Get me out of here. But Mektu was no longer listening. You worship the prophet, eh? Some of you? Any of you? Listen, we know all about her. We killed for her. We carried her flag. And she's not what she claims, do you hear me? She's no favorite of the gods. She's not invincible. She can't listen to your thoughts or punish you from a distance. That's nonsense. And in any way, she's a mess. All warts and wrinkles and bits of food in her teeth. And there's this smell sometimes. It's revolting. You'd think the woman dined on help. The ground collapsed into the pit. Thank you. I'll stop there. Oh boy.
Oh man, that's such a great opening.
Sorry, I stuttered my way through that one. But
no, I have a bunch of notes. You know, there's who wrote What Makes This Book Great? She's a critic and a writer. Anyways, I was like, what makes this book great? I mean, the one thing I love about that opening, and it's threaded throughout the whole book, is the brothers are joining this culture. They don't understand it. Things are constantly going on that they don't know if they're misreading or not. They don't understand, like the pocket owls. I don't know, what's a pocket owl? We have to wait hundreds of pages. And there's this constant threat. And you could, this is why you tell Robert's been a traveler, people, and he's lived many different places. There's this constant feeling of there's always these acts of translation between the languages and the cultures, and you're not sure if people are really threatening you, if they're just saying things clumsily, like that's not in your language. And the two brothers have two different reactions. So when this stuff is happening, like you said, Mektu is just reacting. I just love that sense of strangeness that you get out of fantasy because these are other cultures that we don't know. We're also off-footed. We can't quite get a grasp on what's really happening here. And there's all that in that opening, like when you get to hear it a second time, like I just did after reading the book, you hear all the layered bits of threat that may not be threat, but could be threats. And it adds this tension that works really well in the book.
It's fun to write from the point of view of the deeply clueless sometimes. And they really are. I mean, and they're chipping away at their ignorance across the course of this trilogy. But and I don't mean they're stupid, because they're really not. And they're also not, they're not two people who haven't lived, but they've lived a small town in the mountains life with all the dramas and little tempest in a teacup things that go on in that world. But what they think about the rest of the world is just really half-baked. They just don't know. And yeah, that was a fun thing to put on the page. But it's a really great thing to work with, because it opens up when you're looking over the shoulder as you write, you can surprise yourself that way too. Because I think that, don't you feel that you're sort of under the spell of ignorance of any character or prejudice or stupidities or obsessions, and by necessity that has to sort of cloud a little bit of what you're conscious of when you're writing, don't you think, Daryl? I mean, don't you find that?
I do feel that way. Like I mean, the whole trick is to stay inside the character so you can hear what they're saying. So that you kind of know what they would say. And yeah, you can't get too weirded out by, well, wait a minute, if they say that, like, well, that, sometimes you just got to follow the character and you can't worry too much. Like if you're constantly thinking, oh, I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose the sympathy of the reader, or they're too, sometimes your only way out is through to go even deeper. Like in Spoonbenders that you mentioned, like, I have a character who's a true, he's like a narcissist who can't get out of his own way. And he was the most fun character to write. Because he just would go off on these rants, and I would get to go off on these rants with him, and he was the best.
I mean, which narcissist are we evoking here?
Right, there's a couple narcissists.
Yeah, they're related too. Are we?
Yeah,
the elder
father,
or the younger?
There's the father.
We're thinking Teddy.
Teddy Telemachus is the father of this family, and then his son Frankie. He may not be too much like my brother-in-law I once had, who is even more narcissistic than his father, and is also kind of a conspiracy theorist and likes to hear himself, talk. And so he was, every single joke about Chicago that I could put in Frankie's mouth, and it was,
those are such fun characters. And the great thing about when you to have both of those in my mind for a moment is that Teddy's narcissism is a little more deserved in a way, I think,
because he's actually done things.
Because he's done things, and he's, in his own weird way, he's quite capable. Whereas Frankie is a giant in his own mind, and that's about it. Poor guy.
Right. And so, and I was going to ask you, like, how do you do when you have these character arcs and these brothers at the center of the book? And I assume they're going to be in the center. They were the center of the first and second book, and I assume they're going to be the center of the third one. Is there any kind of planning about character arcs or where you want them to end up? Like how smart do they, or how much they want to change, they're going to change, or you just follow in the moment?
That's a great question. And I'm sitting here, rapidly trying to figure out if I have the answer to that question, because I do plan like mad. But what I've learned, this is, I guess, the sixth novel this is the seventh novel I've written and the sixth I've published. And so the first time around with the Red Wolf Conspiracy, I planned like I've done every time. And then I started to have panic attacks because the actual writing immediately diverged, and I'd wrench it back onto the flight path, and it would wildly wander off again. I'd wrench it back and so on. And, like, oh crap, I'm supposed to go down the other side of that mountain chain. Help, what if I can't even get back over those mountains because there's a thunderstorm? Help. And then, I got to the end and everything was fine, except that I was going to end up writing 4 books instead of 3, and I had to talk to my editor about that. But, and the same thing happened every single time. And very quickly, the panic disappeared because I realized there was a good reason for it. You can plan, and that can be a very useful tool. But if you stick to it rigidly, you've robbed yourself of a whole lot of the fun of writing, because I think you've got to be really entertaining yourself when you write too,
Yeah.
And don't you think? And if you just stick to the plan, you're sort of executing something rather than living it a bit. And, you may need to get to that airport in the distance, but, you can take a lot of different flight paths. That's the great thing about, writing. And some of them may just be a whole lot more scenic. But as far as, you were asking about the development of the characters themselves, I think in that sense, it's a little parallel in that I have it is pretty different just at the level of characters, but they are changing, and they're changing quite a lot. And what's going to be interesting in book 3 is that a lot more time goes by. I mean, books 1 and 2, as big as they are, the events can still be measured in months,
right,
leading up to over a year, but still in a pretty tight time frame, which is quite a lot. I think you add up those 2 books and you've got well over 1,200 pages or so, right? But in book 3, that's going to be a lot more time. So I'm feeling their changes, but I'm not trying to pin myself down and say, you know, Mektu has to be responsible and well behaved by the end of book 3. I mean, that would be a pipe dream anyway. But I think that the changes are going to be, they're going to be much more implicit than obvious. I think that they're going to arrive at mental places that will have implications for the vector of their lives that goes beyond the end of the story. And what we're going to probably see is not, oh, they're just behaving wildly different in the last 100 pages of the book. More like they will have, you know, let's assume they're both alive for the moment, but they'll have reached a different mental place that's going to make them very different going forward, I think. But what that is, you know, I'm still working at the level of instinct to answer your question.
So when you mentioned like you're a planner, I don't know if the planning has changed over time as you write these books. So, I mean, how much one thing people should understand if they haven't read the books is like there's so much world building and because of your point of view characters too, they don't understand a lot of the world just like we don't, which makes them great point of view characters. Because there's stuff happens in Master of Assassins that started blowing my mind when I realized that the genre of the book itself was changing underneath my feet. I don't know how much you want me to talk about that or not talk about it.
Sorry, I don't think that you have to worry about spoilers too much.
Yeah. So in the first book, you gradually realize that you may be operating in, you know, what in the old days used to be called science fantasy, but maybe like a far future, and maybe they're on a planet. There's been this plague. They're quarantined off from other people who we don't get to see, and the scope starts to grow. And these guys are stuck with their limited point of view, but things keep happening where the reader's going, oh my fucking, there's high tech. There are these people who may be from another planet, or at least beyond whatever the quarantine is. There's all this technology, and I love that feeling of excitement that like, oh my God, we turn a corner of the world, we just get much bigger. So I don't know how much like you plan that stuff, how much you know about the world before you choose your path through the world. What do you do?
I mean, a lot of it is instinctive, and I sort of feel like what happens with my world is I have some real basic architecture, but then the specifics start filling in as I get nearer to the writing of something happening in that context. So it's kind of like, you know, having a torch that only illuminates 60 feet at the most. But the closer you get, the more details you can bring out. And, you know, sometimes that'll get me in trouble, and, you know, I'll be ready to write a scene and I'll realize, wait a minute, I have to think about 7 things that go on here that, you know, I haven't thought about, but that's usually okay. I mean, the only challenge there is time, you know, with deadlines for books, but
right.
You know, but yeah, I mean, it's fun to be dealing with that. And a big change in Sidewinders is, of course, we've got more points of view. So we're not just in the village boy's head, right. And pretty much everybody else whose head we go into in Sidewinders, I think there's 4 new points of view. They're all so much more worldly. And a fun thing has been watching a kind of funnel effect that I guess I did it deliberately, you know, in a subconscious way, that all these people that are spread out all over this war-torn continent are being pushed by forces slowly, physically in space together, and also thematically together.
Right.
And yeah, and these 2 least lucky half brothers in the universe are stumbling along at the center of it. They're kind of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern people in a sense.
Right. Or for us,
but your detectives too are like that in a way that, you know, even in what you read, they really are deeply clueless about what they're getting involved in there, which makes them great witnesses.
No, and that's one thing. I mean, that's one of the great things about the detective novel is that someone is licensed to ask all the questions and to sort of force things to happen. And they have license to cross boundaries and be impolitic. So when I was thinking about a novella, I've got this compressed amount of time. I got, you know, these 180 pages or 39K to get through it. And so at one point I had a different structure in mind that was more spread out over the years. It was more like a career retrospective, and there was all the stuff. And
oh my God, really?
Yeah, there was a ton of stuff. It was like a whole season of Behind the Music, but just one band. I had all these sketch ideas, and that's how I think of them as sketches. It's almost like a sketch show, and here's the one that takes place in the bus, and then here's.
Oh man.
There's tons of stuff.
Got to revisit this material, I think.
But then when I realized, wait a minute, you've got this many pages, you've got to get I do every chapter like it's a track on a CD, on an album, and everybody's got to get their solos in. So I realized, oh, that's the interview structure. Okay, so the murder's happening right now, and I mean, there were all these kind of weird structural decisions that pushed everything to. Oh, and the other thing I realized was the comedy a lot came from their dialogue, and a lot of it came from these guys hanging out. So I realized I having a condition where they couldn't just all fly apart and go separate ways, where they're forced. The thing I wrote to find out who the characters were is them picking their band name. There's 5 pages of them picking their band name. And that was where I figured out where all the comedy was, but it was following them. But all that was pre-writing. It was writing in a coffee shop saying, oh, this is who these guys are. So the micro led me to the macro stuff. Like, okay, so it's funnier when these guys are all together. We get to know them better. You'll care about them more. And so that started dictating the structure of the story.
That's a wonderful thing too, when the micro leads you on to the macro, isn't it? Because I mean, I think people keep asking, the standard, what is the origin of this story for me? And it's always character, but and hang on a second, my puppy is just making her cameo here. It's always character, but it's once you have a sense of
oh my God,
person or two, and whatever, you have maybe a little instinctive feeling for the situation and the trouble they're in or the state of mind they're in, then you can start asking yourself, well, why have I imagined these characters? And what kind of circumstance or world or setting or moment would give rise to these very specific characters? I mean, that's one out of endless ways to derive, but it is in a sense what you were saying, that the micro giving you the macro, because all I had no world, I had no setting. I had a couple of drafted young men in a bad war. I knew they didn't have a dime, and I knew they were not worldly, and I knew nothing else. And I knew I really wanted to interrogate how epic fantasy was telling stories about war. But anyway, here is Luna, because Elizabeth at the bookstore tells us we should never spare the audience a dog. Bruna's been very, very good and doesn't know why I spend my life staring into screens. I want to ask one thing, because we are like massively different writers, Daryl, but it occurred to me with a light bulb moment, a way in which we have a sort of tone that's similar in sometimes. And I think it's I think I first noticed this with We Are All Completely Fine, which is funny and scarring at the same time. I think we both do a bit of the silly / serious, or the tragicomic is not really quite what I mean. It's more like the tragic or the absurd comic. No, the tragic absurd, the tragic / absurd in a way. And in Moreau, it's really freaking funny and goofy as hell. And yet when I put it down, there was this feeling of deep unease at the same time. I mean, partly because they're not human anymore, right? But is that something, is that a mode that you have always loved? Is it something would you even think that that's an accurate description of one of the ways that you tell a story?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember I was very cocky with my first novel, and I told my editor, I'm like, look, all I'm trying to do is psychological realism in the face of surrealism. So once you have characters who realize what is happening is crazy, is batshit crazy. It'd be weird if they couldn't comment on it, if they had to pretend like that there was nobody who could stand next to them, even in the darkest moment where you turn them and going, well, this is fucking crazy. Like if you have people who couldn't do that, they seem less than human. And so the trick is always balancing out the tone so you allow for those moments, but you don't allow a glib character to make the book glib. So it's about character. So if the writer is looking down on the characters and making jokes, especially the characters, that's a different kind of comedy that other people do. But I'm trying to always write it from the inside out, which is, wouldn't it be funny if these people, especially if some of them were hyperverbal, could say these things, and then that's where the comedy would come from. And so with the boys, even though they're animal human hybrids, their relationship is like a band of brothers. And so I'm like, yeah, they're on each other and they're needling each other. And so if I knew what their relationship was, then it didn't matter that one was an elephant boy and one was a bat. And,
yeah, I mean, they're very intensely real. And you also, you sit back and go, what the fuck? Every 20 pages, there was this like, where am I kind of a feeling, which is great. I mean, and that's a wonderful thing that fantasy can do.
Well, and this is another thing this is what you do. Like, even though we keep saying it's an epic, but your epics are seem to be micro moments. There's like in the scene that you read, like you sell us on the desert through the grit. There's constant descriptions of the feeling of the sand, what they're seeing, what they're feeling. Like it's built out of micro moments, and that's what makes you you're totally convinced. And this is that the world is real. And I just want to, another point of jealousy is that these books are chunks, but the sentences, I don't know how you maintain your concentration, but the sentences are strong. As an experiment, I was like, because I was saying to my partner, I'm like, you could flip open any page and like there's good sentences on every single page. And so I did it as an experiment. And then I was, and then this paragraph, I flipped open at random, page 207. It was like the surface of some brutal alien world. The plain was blanketed in tall, elongated rocks. They stood in line, straight as sunbeams, one behind another to the edge of sight. Most rose about 10 feet tall, but a few soared to 100 feet or more, 100 or more. No two were alike, and yet they shared an eerie overall shape, which was of cloth, flung over jagged pillars and whipped sidelong by the wind. All was still, yet every stone evoked motion, violent motion, irresistible force. I'm like, fuck, like as a writer, you're reading this stuff and you're like, well, how did he do that?
You're very kind. Thanks.
It's just like that. Those kind of, and I've seen them out west where they look like these curtain rocks. That they are in motion, though they're even in stone. And just the fact that you take the time to do that pocket paragraph, so it sells.
What I'd really like to do is have you speak to my editor whenever I'm going to miss a deadline and say, but he slows down and writes careful sentences. Just say what you just said. Like, if I could just rewind about 10 minutes and just play that for my editor, it's like, just let me be late. Just let me be late all the time. Indulge me.
I will call your editor. Leave Robert alone. Stop hassling him. He's working.
But we're almost at the end of the hour here.
We've blown through the hour. Do people have questions? Are they somewhere in here?
I see a question. Somebody's asking, what made me choose a desert setting and how has this become a character in its own right? Well, what made me choose it, I don't really know, but I have a very pat answer, which is that I spent 4 long books in the previous series out at sea, and I wanted to get as far from the ocean as I could. But then, I realized I was, in a sense, sending my characters off sailing again in a different way, because when they talk about camels as ships of the desert and all those trite things, but when that caravan gets deep in the desert, they may as well be on the backside of the moon, which is was a fun thing about it too, because Yeah, I didn't realize until I looked back at the book, but Sidewinders is really, it's kind of three nested dynamics. There's, the family dynamic, which is the brothers and their uncle who's along, and, other family members who are kind of coming in and out of the story and memory. And they're very close friends and lovers. So there's this tight little knot of relationships, some of which were already there in book one. And then there's the caravan, which is this nest of vipers and, wonderful people and subterfuge. And as we saw here, there's, people who are falling for the same religion and cult that Kandri and Mektu are running away from. So the caravan is its own kind of dramatic stage, if you will. And then there's the whole continent and the political spiral of doom that's taking over the continent and the spreading war. And a fun thing about writing this one is that I got to move back and forth on the zoom lens a lot. So I was sometimes completely tied up in what Mektu and Uncle Chindalan and Kandri were doing to each other and to their, in the love triangles and so on. And then sometimes I was thinking about the whole huge, war and subterfuge and conspiracy and the evils of global capital as playing out as it plays out in this world and so on. And then sometimes it was just a caravan, and oh my God, what's going to happen with the caravan? Right. So, but that's why the desert, I guess, because the fascination just took hold of me, and I ran with it.
It always comes back to boats then. All right. Question for both of you. If you had to point a new fan to a starting point in your works, what book do you want them to read first?
Daryl?
I would probably pick We Are All Completely Fine, because it's a novella and it's short. And we've been talking about it. And it's more in line probably with there's a side of my life that writes more toward the horror end of things. And in fact, the next book is Revelator. It comes out in August. Appalachian horror set in the 30s and 40s about a family who worships their own private god and the women in that family.
I can't believe we didn't talk more about that. I am so excited.
Well, here, I'll have you back. We'll do another thing in August when that book comes out, the 31st. Yeah. So, but I would start probably with, start with We're All Completely Fine, which is about survivors of supernatural horror stories, different genres, subgenres of horror, who are all in group therapy together.
All right.
It's so good.
Robert.
It makes your flesh crawl.
Robert, what's a jumping off point for you?
So it really depends whether you want to do literate kind of YA adult crossover and high fantasy, in which case it's the Red Wolf Conspiracy, because that's the start of that one. Or if you want to be reading a pretty gritty war story, in which case you got to start with Master Assassins and hopefully read it in a week at the beach with your feet up and immediately grab Sidewinders and be addicted. That's what we want. Blow all your money on books and all your time, because what else do you do with summers? So,
excellent idea. I like this. All right, last question for each of you. Have your characters taught you anything?
Oh boy, I'll go first with that one, because yes, Mektu taught me something, and I really want to say Mektu can be the worst jackass in the world, as you got a little taste of in this reading. But he's also, I realized you sometimes find out that you've written a book about X when it's done. And one of the things I realized when I looked back at the end of Sidewinders is that this trilogy is in part a meditation on the nature of genius. And I never even thought or cared much about the question of what genius could possibly mean before. But what I think it means to me, at least when I'm reflecting on this writing project, is the genius is in the person who sees what other people just can't see. Not necessarily because they're any dumber than the person who sees it, but because something is standing in the way. And that, I could nominate a bunch of different characters for that kind of a role. And I think that, the heroes that last in my reading life again and again, they're the ones who see that. I mean, I think about Alyosha and the brothers Karamazov. And I was talking about, you know, Frodo, to the most banal possible example. He is so unremarkable physically, and he has no lineage. He's not one of these great lords, but he figures out that he has to walk to his own death because no one else can do it. And he understands that at a level that actually makes him act on it. And I think, you know, that's the wonder that rises up in me and that makes all the other wonders memorable. So Mektu has taught me that he's taught me the sort of character I really fall in love with and stay in love with, even when they're assholes. And I had an editor begging me at a certain point, like, you can't put him in the book. He's just too much of an asshole. People are going to hate him. He's this crazy wild boar, and he says horrible things. He says sexist things. He says racist things. And he's clueless, and everybody tells him to shut up, and he never does. And all true. You know, there are really not admirable things about him too. And he has this gift because he sees the world differently. And, you know, and I loved writing those contradictions into a character. So that's my kind of long answer there. What about you, Daryl?